My name's David Braden, and I'm one of the co-founders of Commonwealth. At this point, most of what I do here is working with the compost. Compost piles all need to contain carbon material, nitrogen material, air, and water. Whatever kind of pile you make, all of those four ingredients need to be part of it. For nitrogen material, you can use garden waste. That's a very common source. You can also use scraps from your kitchen. You can use waste from grocery stores, although we don't have an example of that here this afternoon. We've got juice pulp from a juice restaurant here in town, and we've got beer grains from a local brewery, and we've got coffee grounds from local cafes. Those are all sources of nitrogen. For carbon, here we always use wood chips, and at home I use straw. You could also use shredded leaves. I have heard that it's important that they be shredded or else they cause problems. The wood chips are nice because they're free, and the tree companies are happy to deliver them so they don't have to pay to dump them. And so we've got lots of wood chips around. We're about to do a demonstration of a windrow, which is a type of compost pile that has no container. It's just freestanding, and we'll be making an extremely short one as a demonstration. Normally a windrow would be quite long, and it would reach back behind me. And we're going to be building this with heat in mind so that seedlings can thrive on top of it. I've already dumped a wheelbarrow of wood chips here, and the bottom layer is always carbon, and in this case it's wood chips. And we always start with making what we call a bathtub around the edge so that the food waste won't fall off. And the bathtub is basically a little rim around the edge of the footprint of the windrow. Actually, we do this inside bins as well. And it just makes a little lip around the edge to contain whatever our nitrogen material is going to be. There it is. And we're going to start with a layer of juice pulp from the local juice restaurant. If this wasn't very wet, we'd probably put water down on this first, but we're about to add really wet ingredients, and so I don't think we need water. That is not compostable. We could empty it out and compost it probably. This is a particularly colorful layer. And I'm going to mix in some beer grains. We've had some trouble with beer grains in the past. Sometimes when we make a thick layer of beer grains, they don't seem to compost. They turn into a sort of petrified, dry thing that's not compost. So I'm going to mix them in with these vegetable waste, and hopefully that will prevent that from happening. And then that's enough material for a layer, and so I'll flatten it out. I'm a little meticulous about flattening things. You don't have to be as careful as I'm being. Whenever there's whole pieces of food, it's worth chopping them up. Small things compost faster than big things. So this is a whole carrot, and a flat-bladed shovel, especially if it's sharpened, works really well for that. So that's our first layer. It's not quite flat enough. The Again, I would probably add water if this weren't so wet, but I'm going to go ahead and add another layer of wood chips first. And I have that handy. When the pile is this low, it's pretty easy for one person to dump a wheelbarrow onto it. Once the pile gets up very high, it's nice to have two people so that you don't smash the pile while you're dumping the wood chips. And then this gets flattened. And each layer, you want to try to bring it up as close to the original bathtub as you can. You will always fail because you can't build it straight up, but that's the goal, is to try to be as close to vertical sides as possible. The tree company that delivered these wood chips had a very sharp shredder or chipper. These are nice small pieces. So once that layer is flat, then we start all over again. We'll make another bathtub. I am going to add water to this though. So I've read that compost is supposed to be the consistency of a wrung out sponge, which I don't know how you can check that, but it should be good and damp. And then here we'll go with another bathtub. When we are going to need another wheelbarrow of wood chips. And I was going to put the garden waste on the next layer too. All right. So I think we'll do the same thing, but this time we'll add some coffee grounds to it as well. The juice pulp is nice because most of it does not need to be chopped up. We used to compost all Whole Foods leftover produce, and all of that had to be chopped. Okay. Oh, I don't need to flatten it yet. These are the beer grains. They smell great when they're fresh, and they're okay after a day, and then they smell really, really bad. So if you're going to use beer grains, I encourage you to use them quickly. probably tell, this is the coffee grounds. And then it gets flattened. Normally I would put lactobacteria down on top of every layer, but I'm not doing it here. And if you'd like to look that up, lactic acid bacteria is very useful stuff. And then you start over. But I don't have any more wood chips, so I'll go get some.
I'm so sorry.
Pull it right forward. Okay. Always failing. And also trying to keep the top as flat as possible. There's some more become anaerobic. This time we will use garden waste that Aaliyah clipped up to make these tomato and pepper plants. Actually, this looks like all peppers. These are now smaller than the whole plants, and that sort of like chopping things up with a shovel. It makes things, smaller things basically compost better than big ones. And that's not all that wet, so I'll add a little water to that. Coffee grounds. We'll flatten it with wood chips. And since this is the last layer for now, it won't get a bathtub. It'll just be spread out and flattened. So this is about half of a windrow. It would get another couple of layers before it would be done, and we just made it, so this is a brand new pile. Back here we have one that's close to a month old. It was another demonstration windrow, tiny one. It's kind of fallen apart some. The thermometer says it's at about 130 degrees in there, and that's at this point probably the hottest that it's going to get, and it will just drop. Larger piles will get hotter. The big ones that we have on the compost lot get up to about 160 degrees, and they stay that hot for months. Smaller piles like this don't get as hot, and they cool down faster. Over here we have a windrow. This was a huge windrow. It was made last March, about 9 months ago. And it was sort of a double wide windrow, and it probably started off about this far off the ground, and as you can see it's sunk considerably, and I think it's probably ready to go for harvesting. I just stuck a shovel in it here, and because this material, you can't recognize any of the food waste that went into it, and that fact that it's unrecognizable is good. It's also cold in there, which means that the microbial activity has slowed way down. I don't see any worms in this shovelful, but there probably have been thousands of worms in here too. We don't really understand the worms' schedule, but they process almost all of the compost that we make. So the compost heats up to 130, 160 degrees, which is way hotter than you could put your hand into. And then once it cools down, red wiggler worms move in and break it down till the sifted compost is very much, it's a large percentage of it is worm castings. And I've got some examples of sifted compost. On the compost lot, we use a machine that was built for harvesting worms. We use it for harvesting compost. It's a big drum with screen on it, and first it passes through an 1/8 inch screen and then a 1/4 inch screen. The 1/8 inch screen sifts out extremely fine compost. This is a sample of it. It's probably mostly worm castings. We get a kick out of telling people that there's absolutely no dirt in this. It's only food waste and wood chips and worm poop. And then the 1/8 inch screen sifts out a very usable compost, but as you can see, it's considerably rougher than the fine stuff. We use all of this on the farm. The fine stuff is available for sale. This is a bucket of unsifted compost. This actually didn't come from the windrow that we were just looking at. This came from the compost lot, but it's very similar stuff. And here's how we sift it. At home, I use a sifter similar to this one. It's just a bottomless box with a screen stapled to it, and very easy to make. This one was just made with deck screws at the 4 corners, and then you have to be a little bit careful with attaching the screen so you don't hurt yourself, but it's pretty straightforward. That's a similar one to the one I use at home. This arrangement is called a trommel. It's like a miniature version of the worm harvester, and it's designed to be set on top of a wheelbarrow like this, and it's made out of 2 old bicycle rims and some caster wheels, and you spin it like this, and the compost goes through and falls into the wheelbarrow. There are designs for this type of a trommel available online, and we don't use this very much anymore, but we did for a long time, and it works well. And I'll show you how the screen works. There's 2 different ways that you can use the screen, just the screen box. You put the compost into it, and then some people just stand at the screen and then push it through with their hands like this. I like to lift it up and shake it like this, and you can see the compost coming out the bottom. When my daughter was little, she used to say it looked like it was raining compost. And then you can finish with smashing things with your hands. And that's about it.